why do you think it was important for the project also to directly address the pedagogical stakes and not just to give the why? Like that first paragraph with why teach feral atlas, it's, asking those questions,
Mm-hmm.
but also not just the why, but also providing different hows, I guess. So I'm wondering, like, why was it important to include that specifically?
That's a great question. And I'm glad you noticed that section. um, the so I think one big answer to that is that to some extent I think the project emerged from um, what we could call a pedagogical impulse, um, and I think again here this is a place to give credit um, to Anna Singh for starting this conversation off, but I think she was asking the question about how do we encourage students to feel engaged in the kinds of things that are being taught in university classrooms, um, especially if you're someone who considers teaching to be a form of activism, which I think a lot of people who teach in environmental spaces do, and I think a lot of people who teach in social justice spaces do. Um, that can be a big challenge, and I think there's truth to the fact that not everybody wants to sit down and read Marx's Capital over the course of 12 weeks and then gradually digest what that might mean for, um, the restoration project you're doing. Um, so the idea of putting Feral Atlas on a digital platform or having it be a digital and multimedia project was, I think, partly just a sort of instrumental way of thinking, okay, um, what will students pay attention to? What can be done to get people to like read more than three, or even like open the thing, and as opposed to like letting a book sit on their shelf or never buying it for their course. Um, so that's also part of the reason it was important to us that it be an open access project, because clearly there are also financial reasons why people may not buy or open books. Um, you asked a second part to that question. The teaching supplement that we put into it has some sample syllabuses, and it also has some ideas about activities that people could do with Feral Atlas or drawing on Feral Atlas, not only in formal classroom settings, but also with community groups or youth groups. And I think I'll answer this for myself, but I approach teaching very much as a researcher, as someone who got into this whole educational thing because I was really curious about questions that I could ask, and I got into anthropology and environmental anthropology because I really liked going out into different places in the world and talking with people and trying to figure out like what's happening here, like what's that plant, what's this plant, which one tastes good, which one, and to try to get a better sense of place, and then questions that could be answered by getting that sense of place. um, and I think the exercises that we um, have included in that supplement are intended to sort of get people engaged in the process of bringing knowledge into being. And I think by bringing knowledge into being, you also get engaged in the process of questioning, well, what is knowledge in the first place? Where do these categories that we use to name species and, sort of gesture at their relationships to each other, like where do these categories come from? Why do we use those categories and not other categories? Um, and I think to an extent, there's, we talked about theory in Feral Atlas also, but there's um, a very strong intent that theory should be play in that same sense that, there's a sort of invention of language and reinvention of categories, but not with the idea that those should be the only categories people should use from here forward to understand the Anthropocene, but rather to kind of try to press people in the direction of thinking about what kinds of patterns they could recognize in their own in their own lives or in their own learning that could help them better frame the world.